Good afternoon. I will now call this work session for Tuesday, September 5th, 2023 to order. And I'll start by reading our Who Are We statement. We are the Polk County Leadership Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to define us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and experiences to ensure that our decisions are focused on providing a high-quality education for all students. The four most important things to our governance team are operating with integrity, respecting our students, staff, families, and each other, establishing a culture where our stakeholders feel valued, supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth, and supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children we serve and find avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There is no acceptable alternative. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for each student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because we will remain committed to supporting the whole child. We hope to engage and empower our students and stakeholders to create a community of lifelong learners. And with that, I will turn it over to Superintendent Hyde.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, members of this community, and staff. Thank you for being here today. We have a short workshop today. And so the first item before us is the 5-year work plan update for the fiscal year 2024 through 2028. And we have with us today Joshua McLemore, Senior Coordinator for Facilities and Planning. We also have Harry Fix, Assistant Superintendent for Facilities and Operations.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. So really, based at the board's request, you wanted to see roughly what does our 5-year plan look like when it gets sent up to DOE. And so we've tried to do our best that we can, understanding that some of the data that gets pulled down whenever DOE turns on the website and starts allowing school districts to start uploading their plan, some of the data fields DOE populates for us based off of cost of student stations and what the state is projecting in terms of student population growth. So what we tried to do to the best of our ability using last year's data, we pretty much downloaded it in an Excel format and then started manually inputting all the data that we could. And so that's really what's been attached to this work session agenda item. So you get a rough idea about what it looks like that we're about to be, what would be submitted to the state when it's ready, pending your questions or comments.
Additionally, Mr. McLemore, Mr. Fix, if you'll please come to the microphone. I forwarded Mr. Fix some questions that I received from board member earlier today in relation to 2 other projects that have been discussed but aren't currently reflected in this plan before the board. So, Mr. Fix, if you'd please address those 2 schools, Crystal Lake and also Stanbaugh Middle.
Thank you, Superintendent. Yes, and Superintendent and the board members. So earlier today, as the superintendent said, he sent me 2 questions about schools that weren't showing up in what you had in front of you when this was presented. One of them was it is in the plan that we're submitting, but it didn't show up in the PowerPoint, and that was Stanbaugh Middle. Stanbaugh Middle, we had the planning dollars in the last year of the plan, and as the plan moves forward, it'll start rolling forward. Now, the reason we haven't pulled it forward any further than that is because that will be largely a middle school, and those dollars will largely come from sales tax dollars. So as that flow of money comes forward, then we can start pulling it further and further forward. Similarly, though, a question came about Crystal Lake Elementary, and I was shocked because it was one that had been in the plan and we had just inadvertently left it off. So what I said to the superintendent is we can do this one of 2 ways. We can ask the board to pull the item from consent, and what we can do is we have money to, in that 5th year of the plan, put in the planning dollars, and we will schedule it into then the 6th year, so it'll start rolling forward as well. It was just it had been in the plan, and we had just somehow inadvertently dropped that off. we can do it that way, or we can go ahead and pass the plan, and then the next board meeting available, we can amend the plan and just add that in as I've suggested. And that is in the 5th year, we would add $4 million. And we do have the money there to do that, and then start pulling it forward as well. And so one of the things I did want to, this is a good segue to say, and it was actually, I think, a question that you had asked before, Dr. Allen. What I'd like us to start doing is probably 4 times in the year, throughout the year, start workshopping the plan with you all in bite-sized pieces, so to speak, so that we don't come across this very thing of, ooh, we that slipped out, just I hate to say Scribner's error because that refers to a map, but an error on our part that we left that out. But that we workshop these things with the board so that make sure that we're all on the same page as we go through it. And we would start with a demographic overview to show you what we're looking at demographically. And then we would start then with the next work session, we would do an overview of the estimated revenue, what we see coming and the revenue. Then we would start taking, okay, this is our population projections that we see. These are our revenue projections we see, and then start taking the next couple sessions to break down the district into geographic size, bite sizes, and say, okay, this is what we see going into the plan. So we would constantly be having the plan before you throughout the year, so that when we come to this time next year, we're not looking at all of this at one piece at one time. Now, having said all that, of course, the part of the plan that is the most salient is the first year of the plan that we're about to go into. However, in order to have a true revolving 5-year capital plan, I think it's important that I make sure that we're all on the same page so that yes, we have year 1, but that we have year 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can look further to 6 and 7 and start seeing how that starts rolling forward. And that gets us all on the same page. So I hope that's good with the board, and I think the superintendent and I have spoken, and that the superintendent was okay with that as well. But feel free to, if that's not the case, Superintendent.
Ms. Miller?
I just have 2 questions. One, when you say that like the Stanball project and the Crystal Lake project will start rolling in, will that automatically look like it will be in that 6th year, or we don't know that until we review?
No, it will. So in the 5th year, we'll put in the planning dollars, and the 6th year, it would be there, and they'll start rolling. So then what I'm proposing that in this plan, we would have about $6 million in what we call planning dollars. That means to go out and make sure that we do an analysis of the land. We already have the land in this instance, but make sure we have, we do a phase 1 environmental, a phase 2 environmental, start taking it through any processes with the local government to make sure we get our approvals in place and so on. And then, of course, doing the planning for the school, getting the site plan, the designs, and so on done. So that would be, we would have the funding in the 5th year of the plan. The 6th year then would be the construction. So then this year, you'll see money out in the 5th year of the plan, but then the next year plan, all of a sudden, that 5th year comes into the 4th year, the planning dollars, and what's in the 6th year, the construction dollars start coming into the 5th year. And you'll see that for both Crystal Lake and Stanbaugh Middle.
And those are 2 separate, those are 2 very different projects, because
Yes.
Stanbaugh is moving locations, a complete build, other than the rebuilding on property that we already have done that we've had for many years. Okay, so I understand that now. And seeing that we've had to go back and address the Crystal Lake issue not being there, is there a system in place to know what else may have been on that list that we are not seeing now? Other than, like my district, I keep up with my schools, but I wouldn't have asked about Crystal Lake and known that it was left off the plan.
Well, that is exactly in part why I want to go to this quarterly as well.
Okay.
Because I want to that will help me to make sure that we're workshopping it and that we're not leaving things off. I was actually talking to Mr. McLemore about that earlier today, and I said, I've not had this happen before, and I'm not sure if it's because one of the districts I did this in and exercised this a lot in was Lake. Well, Lake's about 1/4 of the size. So here we have so many schools that it starts getting, I think it needs more oversight than we've been giving it. And I think with these quarterly workshops, I think it'll start getting more of our oversight. Plus, in our reorg, you did add a couple positions, and that'll help us as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. Here's my thought. I remember at one time when we received these, you did a great job of putting them together, and I think at the bottom, it totals number of elementaries, number of middles, number of high school. What I'd like to see, if it's not too much trouble as we go through, just a little synopsis, how much dollars are being spent in each district.
Okay, we can certainly do that.
We used to get that years ago, and
Okay.
it's helpful to know how the dollars are being spent based on growth and so forth, which this is, obviously.
We can certainly do that, and I think even as part of our quarterly, we can certainly bring that into focus as well.
I mean, just once a year, whenever you do this final plan. Yes, sir, I don't want to add more work.
Ms. Fields?
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. My question is similar to Ms. Miller. At the last work session, I remember asking, was any schools not going to be included that was on the capital list because of some of the projects that were there? And just wanted to make sure that nothing was missed. So my question is the same as Ms. Miller's question is, what are we going to do to ensure that nothing is missed? And how is the Sales Tax Oversight Committee utilized? Do they get a chance to look at everything that we're looking at? Do they get a chance to have discussion if there's something that's missing that they might have an eye on more so than we would? I'm just trying to understand what's the value of the Sales Tax Oversight Committee.
They are actually probably one of our best committees. They are a fantastic committee. They meet quarterly. They meet quarterly. They're a very good oversight group. They are fully engaged. Of course, we have to make sure that we're advertised well if more than one of you came, but I would highly recommend that you come to one of them and see. It's a great group, fully engaged. We've actually taken them to some of our schools to look at. I remember I was with them when we did a tour of Willow Oak. And they just loved it, absolutely loved it. And of course, that's the same design that's basically at Bella Cita and at South Point Elementary. They absolutely thought that was great. They were thrilled, and in fact, they are very much behind promoting the sales tax and being our partners in so many areas.
Yes, sir. I've served on that committee before as a board member, so I'm very familiar with the work. I just want to make sure that we're utilizing them to their best capacity, because you're very correct. They're very sharp. Yeah. They know the work. I just want to make sure that we're utilizing them to the best to help us so that we don't have an oversight. Second set of eyes never hurts anything.
Certainly, and do we pass the full 5-year plan past them? If not, let's do that as part of these quarterly meetings, definitely. I know that we take sales tax projects before them, but I do think that there's a lot of merit in taking the whole of it before them. So it almost turns out that way because, as you probably know, so many of our projects, because of the modernizations, we often add additional capacity. So they're often both funded out of sales tax and somewhat of the impact fee dollars. So a lot of that does then wind up just by that very nature going before them. But I definitely think that having another set of eyes on the whole thing is a fantastic idea.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Hyde.
Yeah. Mr. Sharpless?
I just want to thank you first for addressing my concern last time of actually seeing what we're going to submit to the state. I just want to know, if I'm voting on something, I want to know what I'm voting on. And so my question is, since you said the state populates some of these figures that we don't have, so does the board get to see that later, that we actually, what the state has done? Or, when do we see the actual finalized plan?
We can bring it back to you and show you what winds up being the final product. Just to give you an example of how much it isn't in our hands. I worked for a board one time, and of course, there's never enough capital funding to do everything that you want to do. They wanted me to send up a plan to the state that was unbalanced to show the state, hey, look, we've got all this much more in additional needs. So they wanted me to submit a plan that was financially unfeasible. Now, in their defense, that was their goal was just so that the state could see how much more they needed. And I told the board, I said, I literally cannot do that. It is a program I have to enter in, and if I do that, it won't send. It will reject it and will send it back to me. So I say that to say that what Josh did was really a great idea. Like he said, he downloaded it, put it into Excel, so those figures we could change, we changed to show you what they were going to be. But when we go to submit it to the state, because of what he said, that there are certain numbers that they'll populate, it'll look slightly different in some areas. We can certainly copy that off and bring it back to you all and show you all, and we can either go over it in a workshop or we can just give it to you and let you phone us individually. But it will do such things as it will populate, like he said, it'll populate enrollment projections in the future. One of the things is the state they look way out into a 20-year horizon. And over that time, their projections are pretty good over a long period of time. Our projections, and they would admit this to us as well, our projections in the short term are better because we're closer to the data and we're closer to any changes that occur, whether those changes are increasing enrollment or decreasing enrollment. We see it quicker than Tallahassee would, so we can make adjustments quicker. So while our projections may look like this, over time, they're just taking a linear approach to it. So over time, they'll look pretty good. But in the short term, ours are better. I say that to say that in the 5 years that they return to us, the projections more than likely won't look as healthy as what our projections would in the 5-year term. That's okay. We're forced to work within their numbers, and we can still make it work because we get a crack at it, so to speak, every year. All right. So in that instance, that's correct. The other thing is no matter how much we project the cost of the student station to be because of the reality that we deal with, the state has a formula that they use, and they plug in an allowance of a student station cost. It doesn't mean that we get to look to that cost and say, oh, look at that cost. Here, construction company, this is all you can build for. It's something that Tallahassee does so they can say, look, this is how much we're providing of what they needed the capital need, even though it may not be totally accurate. So they take it upon themselves to populate certain numbers. I don't know if that provide any more clarity or confusion.
I just want to know when I'm voting on something that we're submitting to the state that it's going to be as accurate as possible, which I appreciate what you've done on the estimations. So that way, once it is submitted, I would like to know because it doesn't come back in front of us for another vote. So I would like to know what we voted on, and
Right.
I would appreciate that.
So in the simplest terms, the best way of looking, and we'll in our quarterly workshops, we can make sure we go over this. The best way to look at a plan, although the font on this is pretty small, is to look at the estimated revenues and the estimated expenditures. And that is really the heart of a capital plan. So you look at what are your revenues going to be, and then what do you want your expenditures to be? And those are the things that we'll focus on. And of course, the thing that we'll do on top of that is we'll bring in demographics into it, we'll bring in geography into it, and we'll bring in student station costs into it.
Thank you.
There are no further questions, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Next item, Madam Chair, members of the board, that's before you in the superintendent's report is an information item for donations. I will go ahead and address the issue of donations since Ms. Miller submitted a question earlier about schools and what are the requirements for reporting. and with 2 new board members, and it makes sense to go ahead and review this policy. Schools are only required to list any donations that exceed $500. That also matches your board policy on donations. Historically, some of the things that don't get factored in is should we have a partner entity, for example, that partners with a school 10 times during the year. And if each one of those events results in a $100 donation, it's never reported as $1,000. It's not reported here in the board document because it didn't exceed that $500 threshold. The other thing we do not report on is sweat equity. So when we have volunteer organizations that come on our campuses and spread mulch and do other beautification things, there's no way for us to accurately capture that. What we do, though, on the other side of that, is schools will issue a letter to that partner organization acknowledging their contributions and their donations. Again, our current donation policy does not allow an accrual of donations to be reported. If the board would like us to pursue that, we can modify the procedure to do so. But then at the end of it would be basically an end-of-the-year report for all of the donations on behalf of a particular entity or group of entities. So that's just some clarification. So that's what you see before you here. There's one school, I believe, that went underneath, or two instances, I think, that went below 500, but those schools volunteered to list that. It's not a requirement per board policy or school board or school district procedures. So I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that for you, and it was a good question submitted by Ms. Miller. There are no questions. Ms. Wyatt.
Sorry, I was trying to get back to the screen. For the Give All Community Foundation, can we make sure it's listed on there, whether that's a grant or what fund it's coming from? Because those are oftentimes either businesses or individuals donating. It's on the second page, or sorry, on the last page, second one from the third one from the bottom. It just was a fairly sizable donation, so
Yes,
I want to
ma'am.
make sure we know where it's coming from.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Absolutely. See no further questions on that item. Madam Chair, if I may, while it's not listed, I just want to highlight a few other things prior to us moving on. First and foremost, I do want to, and I'll take this opportunity during the board meeting tonight, I want to recognize all of our amazing employees who really take time away from their own families to help make sure that we're able to properly shelter and address all of our facilities needs immediately prior to, during, and after a storm. I don't think people realize how many people volunteer and give up that time. We had over 300 district-level administrators who were assigned and stay at these shelters around the clock. Initially, I know that there was some initial concern with us opening up shelters, and if you recall, board members, only one shelter, which was Mulberry Middle School, had their shelter time begin at 4 p.m. What people don't realize is all the planning that goes into being able to accommodate that. Because again, what we're trying to do is accommodate the need of our local community, and primarily, especially for those who are medically fragile or medically dependent. It takes almost a day and a half for Citrus Connection to schedule all of those patients and all of those residents to be relocated to 3 different facilities if they were all open. And that's just their scheduling need because there's only so many hours that they can operate their drivers and their equipment. And so we have to really work around their needs. And so what we learned last year was how can we set up a shelter? A traditional shelter, all that's involved in that shelter is making sure we have the adequate staff there and that we have 2 tables. That's all that's entailed with sheltering. We don't provide cots, we don't provide furniture, we don't equipment. Any of those things are not addressed in a traditional general shelter. For the pet shelter, the law enforcement worked with the Sheriff's Department and Animal Control, delivered all of the crates to Tenor Rock High School at 8 and 9 a.m. the next morning after we'd made the decision to go ahead and prepare on Tuesday for Wednesday's closure. So all of the equipment was there, and all it has to be done is we put the Visclean in the hallways, and then we stage them in the hallways. So there's not a lot to us having to prepare our shelters. That 4 o'clock dismissal at Mulberry, we had most of the students off campus by 4:21. I received constant updates. We had 8 law enforcement officers. The cafeteria had already been secluded. They had already established a traffic pattern, and there were only 4 residents looking to shelter there at 4:30. So we were more than able to accommodate. in the future, Mulberry Middle School falls off of that first priority shelter list. Mulberry High School will now become the priority shelter, which gives us an earlier dismissal. I'm glad that, we work very closely with the county and the Emergency Operations Center. Mr. Davis and his team deserve a lot of credit. They lose a lot of sleep before and during these events, but they do a great job in making sure that we have the right information we need to make an informed decision about school opening and closure events. In particular, for our school district, we are fortunate that we have a school calendar that gives us almost 5 days. It gives us a total of 5 days of instructional time based off the state's calculation that we do not have to make up if we have to close due to a storm. That's a benefit to us as a school district. And however, with this event, I know there was a lot of, some conversation, and everyone's a meteorologist. I get it. Everybody's watching the same channels we are. And with respect, I have to look long-term. And, as we looked at this storm in particular, and we looked at its trajectory, and we looked at, its strength and a lot of different factors, we were fairly confident that we would get exactly what we got, a wind and rain-related event, thankfully. Nothing more significant than that. And that played out for us. So I think the information we had was very thorough. But we did have to use 2 days of those 5. And at the time, there were 4 other storms off the coast, and one, Hurricane Franklin, churning and just doing circles out in the ocean. And, we have to look long-term, what are the implications potentially for the school district should we have multiple closures? And so I tried to look at it, how do we create the safest possible scenario for our staff and our students and our families and our community? How do we fulfill our obligation to the community? But how do we also ensure that we're saving some days in the event that we have to close again? But we have an amazing team of dedicated staff. And what a lot of people don't realize behind the scenes is we issue payroll 2 days early. We take care of all those things. I mean, we did that without anyone asking us. And so I think as a school district, we were incredibly responsive in this event, and we will be in future events. It's interesting that for all those that were saying we should have closed on Tuesday, immediately after the storm passed, there were same individuals on the flip side saying, why aren't you open on Thursday? And I think what I would offer as an explanation is it takes us time to do the telephone tree to make sure that we have an adequate number of staff to make sure that we can open. We need to make sure we have bus drivers, we need to make sure we have teachers, food service employees, everyone else in between to ensure that we're able to support the reopening of school. And not all of our teachers and employees live in Polk County. Many of them are living in coastal communities that are going to be directly affected. So we do have to be somewhat cautious there. So I just wanted to offer that and a little bit more of an explanation to those and answer any questions for our community. The other thing I'd like to highlight, and again, I will reemphasize this tonight, I want to continue to make sure that we highlight pedestrian and driver safety. Unfortunately, we have had a very tragic start to the school year when it comes to student drivers, all of which to date have been speed related. And so unfortunately, as board members, you get updates from me constantly about driving and accidents and the untimely passing of a young child and students. And every single instance has been speed related. Even our own sheriff has come out again recently and pleaded with parents and students to slow down and have those conversations. Just because a child is ready to drive, or is old enough to drive, doesn't mean they're truly ready to drive. And we have to constantly reiterate to them the importance of, especially during inclement weather, during rain events, that puddling water, pooling water becomes a hazard, and that you can't drive the same way during rain or after a rain event that you can prior to that. And so, I would just continue to plead to our community that they have these conversations with their children, they follow up with it, and this is something that we all will benefit from. Because again, it breaks my heart, I know it bothers board members, anytime I have to share with you the unfortunate news about the untimely passing of one of our students or their family members. And we've had, if I recall correctly, I asked law enforcement to confirm, I think we've lost over 10 students since just immediately prior to the start of school due to traffic-related accidents. Students, both former and immediately very recent graduates. And so it is something that's impacting our community. So I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that, and I'm sorry to be the Debbie Downer right now, but it's something that weighs heavy on my heart right now. And if we don't continue to message this, then it's never said. and nobody hears us. So I appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair. I do see on the speakers list, I see Ms. Miller.
Just have a question. Thank you. As far as the community, I did get a couple of inquiries about when we close down for storms, the students that are utilizing Kids Pack or other food sources for the time they're not in school, do we send more food home, or do we open the food pantries? Does the county or cities do that, and we direct parents there? What the resource is for those people during those closures?
We would not, unless we have adequate time to prepare, we would not ordinarily just simply, we may not have the resources at every one of our school-based pantries to send home extra supplies. So yes, they would be referred to local agencies, Red Cross and others who would be able to adequately support them. And then our schools would, obviously, as we did last time, we would recover quickly and be able to provide supports as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you, Superintendent. I just want to say, when you're in the middle of a crisis, you just never know, right? Which way that storm's going to go. I mean, 1 minute it looks like it's headed one direction, and it can really change in a moment's notice. And I saw so many posts on Facebook, social media, in the news about a lot of our employees, as you've said, taking the time when they could be home with their family, serving in one of our shelters, and a lot of you all that I'm looking at out there, taking the time to be responding, to go to the shelters, whether you're sitting there at a desk and checking in, you're still not home with your family. You still may have wondered how they're doing. Now, granted, this one was a lot of wind and a lot of rain, and I don't know about y'all, but we were blessed and we did not have damage this particular time, but there's been others when it has been. And I just want to say a personal thank you to you, Superintendent Hyde, and to your team, and to all those folks that took their time to sign up or be voluntarily signed up, or however that works, to help man the shelters and to try to help. And I know I watched the numbers. You were wonderful about posting how many folks were at each of our schools. And no, it wasn't great, but that's a blessing, because that means maybe it wasn't as bad as we were expecting it to be. But still, there needs to be a special thank you and a shout out to all of those that did come out of their homes on their own accord to be helpful and to serve others in need. And I just want to say a huge heartfelt thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Fields?
Well, I just want to thank you for calling it early, because parents need to know what they need to do with their babies. And some of the neighboring counties didn't do that. It was like the morning of, when they said you don't have to report to school. And so that's no type of planning for families. So I want to thank you for that. And as Ms. Cunningham said, just thank all of the people that continuously sacrifice for us, and we're not even aware. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the payroll was done early, so that was an additional burden on the staff to do that, but they did it. And the emergency center, having all that information readily available for us, we were able to help others that were wanting to know, what does it look like? So overall, I think excellent job, well done. And do we do anything extra for the staff that have given the added time? I know they got a chance to go home the next day to rest, but that's a lot for them. I don't know what we do to additionally compensate them, or I know we've had this discussion before. I don't remember exactly what we have in place.
So starting last year, we reinstituted, outside of trades groups, we reinstituted compensation for these individuals because, as you recall, last year in particular, we had some of our school-based principals who refused to leave their campuses because they wanted to stay, and they were there for 3 days. I mean, it's just, their level of dedication is incredible, and one of them in particular had their roof ripped off their home, but they stayed at the school to stay on the shelter. And I think that's a great example of the level of commitment that our staff continue to demonstrate within the community, but they are compensated. For trades groups, there's language that we draft. Mr. Pitts and the team do an amazing job there to make sure, and we provide them assurances. Last year, there were some initial delays with issuing payments to individuals because of the process we had in place, collecting paperwork, but lessons learned, we streamlined that process, and everyone will get paid in less than 6 weeks from the time in which they served, and then we submit that to FEMA for reimbursement. So all of it has to be documented, it has to be documented properly. That's what led to some of the initial delays last year. But again, we worked out all the kinks, and I'm really proud of the process we put in place. But yes, ma'am, we do compensate them. And as much as I wish they had all gone home the next day and slept, they did not. They went right back to work, as you know, because they're inspecting every single one of our campuses to make sure there's no down power lines, no trees, no roof damage, no water intrusion. You know, essentially, we were very fortunate concerning the amount of rain we got. And some schools like Lake Ship that historically have flooded every year. The principal called me today and she said, we had no water get into the school this year. We probably put 1 billion sandbags around that campus. I don't know how many we had out there, but they did a great job preparing. We learn from those lessons and we prepare adequately. But we only had 14 sites that had any semblance of water intrusion, water coming in underneath door seals, and then some from roof leaks, and we were replacing ceiling tiles so we wouldn't have the staining and things like that, and then identifying where those leaks come from so we can prevent them from happening in the future. So I think all in all, the team did a great job. But yes, they're an amazing group of individuals, and they deserve all the accolades. Because they do work around the clock, and they drive out in the storm to fix things, and they're sitting on our shelters with us. And law enforcement, the same thing. I can say that for every local law enforcement agency who's there to support us. And they background check every individual coming into a shelter so that we know it's a safe environment. And we're sheltering pets and a whole variety of pets. It's quite impressive sometimes the calls we get. Can we let this kind of pet in? We've had a horse at one of our high schools previously. So it's always interesting what happens. But thank you, Ms. Fields and Ms. Cunningham, for your comments.
Well, don't have me with pets, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sharpless.
I just have a question. First, I just want to say ditto to what Mrs. Cunningham, Mrs. Fields says about our staff. It's amazing. My question is more on the fiscal side. Do we get compensated by the state and/or county for providing these shelters? And do we know how many individuals are county residents versus out-of-county residents? Do we get some sort of reimbursement for that? I was curious if you could talk through that just for a second.
We do not get reimbursement for opening our shelters. We get reimbursed for the manpower and the labor that goes into it, any materials that we may use. Anything else would be under our insurance claims and things like that. There's damage to a facility. But no, we're not reimbursed by any other agency that I'm aware of. FEMA is our only means of reimbursement, and after following a storm, we submit all our paperwork. There's actually a face-to-face meeting that takes place with them as they validate everything, and then we get reimbursed in that manner.
So for anyone watching, it's really our school system is, we bear the responsibility for this.
And other than law enforcement officers, and our special needs shelter, where the medically fragile individuals go, we are the only people manning those shelters. And so I think that, again, needs to be reiterated. But we do so willingly and gratefully to know that we have. I'm grateful to know we have so many facilities that qualify. And I'm grateful, Mulberry, for example, middle school, if you look at last year and this year, hands down one of our most populated shelters, mostly because of some of the structures in the surrounding communities and the needs that exist there. But I'm grateful to be able to move it now to the high school. There's more parking. We get an earlier dismissal. Even if we had to do a half day, those types of things, we benefit from being able to relocate it to that facility. But as far as numbers, so we had capacity this time for 113,000 residents, shelter residents. We sheltered a whole 113. And again, as the storm waned in our community and had less of an impact, we didn't see the response that we would have normally seen as we did last year. But of the 113, if I remember correctly, there were only 4 that were out-of-county residents. 2, a couple who was relocating here and was waiting on the closing of their home. And they were staying at a VRBO and basically we were told they had to relocate because of the storm. So we sheltered them. And then we had somebody from Charlotte County, and we had one other that I'm aware of. But to my knowledge, we only had the 4 out-of-county residents in our shelters.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. Madam Chair, there are no further questions on that. That concludes the superintendent's report as far as workshop items.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. We will now go through the agenda for this evening's meeting. Any questions on Section A, opening items? Or do Section C and D, public comments and approval of the minutes? Any questions on consent agenda, Sections H through J? Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to, and Ms. King's with us if anybody has any questions. I sit on that insurance committee, and you'll see the vision insurance policy renewal. That was something that was discussed at the last committee meeting, and it is some changes that we've made. I just want to make sure it's known that this is a guarantee, and Ms. King, please come forward if I'm not stating this correctly. This is a guarantee on rates. We've changed the plan somewhat, but for this 4-year term. But if we decide to go with a different plan or we find something else, it's not locking us to them. Is that correct, Ms. King? Sorry, I'm
Come on down.
giving your information. If you just want to talk about that, because the vision plan has changed, and I don't want people to see that and not know there was discussion, and there's possibility of future changes depending on
Correct.
what that was.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. The vision insurance is very popular. I think I did put in the item how many people we had enrolled, because that was a question last time I wasn't prepared for. So it is very popular, and the main difference is our losses were running over 100%. Well, you can't do that and stay in business. So we needed a rate increase. So what we proposed was actually a low plan and a high plan. And if you all remember, we have 3 dental plans that offer various types of benefits and premiums. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be defaulting employees to the low plan. Now, that's not the current plan benefits. The current plan benefits are the high plan. So if you buy progressive lenses, you buy the fancy lens upgrades, you may want to stay with the high plan. But since it's an increase in rate, the employee during open enrollment will need to go in and elect that.
Have we done anything to educate our employees on this before they show up at the eye doctor and find that out?
We will be doing this a lot during open enrollment. We actually have every Saturday during October, we're going to be at various locations throughout the county for the morning to meet with employees that would want to come in and do everything from a flu shot to looking at their enrollment, having questions. Everside Health will be there, so we'll have a lot of things available for employees. And we'll also have messaging within Benefit Focus as well, which is the platform we use to enroll.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. All right, next, anything else on H or J? All right. Anything consent sections K through O? Dr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at N2 and had just pushed a question off to Superintendent Hyde earlier in the week, and definitely a huge supporter of the COLTS program. And I had asked if we have considered opening up that service agreement to include 6th through 8th grade, which is middle school students, in regards to utilizing that COLTS program. And Superintendent Hyde's response to me was, do you remember that? I think that the board was not favorable towards that in the past. And obviously we're in a different place today as a board, and I don't know if I've ever had an opportunity to hear from us as a board on that, but just wanted to note that with the possibility of maybe piloting a school with the 6th through 8th grade in the future in some way, and was curious of some feedback on that. But
Yes, sir. When I met with Citrus Connection, Mr. Davis and others were part of that conversation. Previously, the item had been brought before the board, and there were some concerns with the age of students being able to access the transportation, but obviously there's a willingness on behalf of the board to revisit that and have a discussion. So we're happy to bring Citrus Connection back and bring a proposal before the school board that would provide them the same level of access.
thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Ms. Miller?
I appreciate Mr. Allen, Dr. Allen bringing that up. I don't know that I was on the board at the time when it was brought up because I've had multiple conversations sitting. I do sit on a transportation board with the county, but also with Citrus Connection. And I think it was an education piece that needs to be made to the community. We're not a community that's used public transportation as vast as other large metropolitan areas, but I think it would greatly help our community, and I've been a proponent for it. So I appreciate us talking about it again, and if that can be done in the future, we may be able to get some questions answered at that time. Thank you.
And Mr. Sharpless?
Actually, going back to J3 just real quick, I know we mentioned, Mr. Fix mentioned earlier about a couple options there. So I'm assuming this means the amendment, potential amendment. Remember you talked about we could pass a couple different ways. So since it's on the consent agenda, I just wanted to get clarification.
Oh, hold on just a second. All right, you're good now.
So the board this evening could choose to, or now could choose to pull this from consent, and then as part of pulling it from consent, you would bring it up and ask us to amend the plan. As we stated now, the planning dollars are there in the 5th year for Stambaugh, but they aren't for Crystal Lake. It was just an oversight. Or we can leave the plan on consent, but at the next available board meeting, bring back an amendment that amends it to bring Crystal Lake, put planning dollars in the 5th year of the plan. Either way will work, whatever the board's pleasure.
What would the pleasure of the board be for that? Ms. Cunningham?
I would think, since it's here and it's on consent, that we go ahead and pass it, and then I think at the next board meeting, we go ahead and make the amendment to include Crystal Lake at the 6th year timeframe. That's my thought.
Is there any reason that can't, because the next board meeting that we'll have is end of October for voting. Is there any reason that that couldn't come end of October, timing-wise?
No, it's end of September.
That's just a work session.
Oh, I thought it was a board meeting. I have it down. Okay.
I don't have the deadlines memorized, but I don't think that's a problem. Do you know? It's not too late to get anything on October, right?
Okay. If we could just
Yeah.
double check that between,
Wendy, just let me know. So we'll be able to get it on October, yes.
okay, perfect.
Well, what we'll do then is we'll bring it back, we'll amend so that Crystal Lake will put $4 million in that 5th year planning, and then it'll start that process of rolling it forward as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharpless. Any other questions on J through O? All right, next is our action agenda, section P. And I believe the Sales Tax Oversight Committee is, was this Mr.? Is that yours? Okay. Ms. Fields. And so I'll have you read his nominee. Any questions on the public hearing, section Q? Oh, sorry. I apologize.
I had said that I wanted to meet with Mr. Pitts, but the weather came, and we did not get a chance to meet, but we did have some communication today. And I had a couple of questions, and I wanted Mr. Pitts to come down, Superintendent Hyde, if that's okay with you,
Absolutely.
to answer my questions so that it can be on record, because there's some confusion on the LEA positions and 10 months versus 11 months, and the questions that I have, if you can just answer those for me, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. The change from LEA facilitator to ESC facilitator, both positions are 10 months. So there would be no change on that schedule. It's the even wash, 10 month to 10 month.
So there would be no impact on salary or wages?
No impact.
Everything
on
is the
salary.
same?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's correct. And the reduction from 92 LEA facilitators to 83 ESC facilitators, that reduction was based on new numbers for student population, the ESE population. In the previous year, 9 of those positions were left on the org chart, and they should have been reduced based on that student population. But the 9 position reduction is only in positions, they're vacant positions, not people in those positions. So it won't lead to anyone losing their job.
Okay.
Those, respectfully too, those positions actually remain there. They're not being eliminated. Ms. Williams was adamant that she keep those 9 positions and that we'll make adjustments throughout the year continuously. As enrollment may change, as student needs may fluctuate, IEPs can change, the level of service may change. And so those 9 positions remain available for her to assign new staff to throughout the year.
But I don't think that's the way it's listed on the document.
That's how we presented it. And I'll have Ms. Williams here this evening to make sure we've confirmed that. But that was my understanding. Mr. Pitts, if I'm wrong, my recollection, because we put all of these questions that are being asked now, we put in writing to staff. Because in fact, I recall doing this myself. So those 9 positions were remaining in the budget as flex positions should they be needed. They can easily be funded out of IDEA. They will not come from general budget any longer. But those positions, our commitment to staff was that we would continue to evaluate the needs of our students at our school level and add staff, because those 9 positions would not necessarily just go away. But to Mr. Pitts's point, they are not currently filled with individuals, so they are vacant positions.
One of the things, Superintendent Hyde, that I said to Mr. Pitts is bringing the different department recommendation in pieces, to me, is a lot to chew on. And something that might have been presented in February, and now we're here in August, my memory might not be as sharp as yours, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
And so trying to understand it, trying to absorb it, and then one of the things that was confusing for me, and I think that Mr. Jason has answered it for me, is that today, are we voting on the overall district reorganization? Are we voting on those truancy positions? And it's my understanding from Mr. Pitts that we are voting on the truancy positions, because we've already voted on the district reorganization. So I guess I just need clarity on what in actuality are we voting on today?
In Ms. Fields, it is the 3 truancy, the added positions, and an upgrade from a community outreach facilitator to a hearing officer. I had listed all the positions on a spreadsheet that we had approved over the last couple of months, but it's only those 3 new positions and 1 upgrade.
Before the board today.
Before the board this evening.
That helps me understand, because the way that it looks, it says district reorganization, it doesn't say for those 3 positions.
And we could certainly revisit how we bring this information before the board, but to bring it in its totality is also problematic. It would consume the entirety of a workshop. In fact, probably multiple workshops, because there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered and addressed. So I'd be more than happy to work with Mr. Pitts and get additional feedback from board members. It's not our intention to string it out so that it becomes difficult to remember, because again, we only have 2 meetings a month. I respect that. But we want to make sure that we provide a thorough explanation of each one of these changes and be able to address questions from board members and give you enough time, because you received the packet, hopefully, with information. You've seen an improvement in the timeline in which you receive information prior to a meeting as far as it's being concluded, so that you have adequate time to review. And that was our intention, was to give you time to focus on one area and ask questions as you saw needed. But we can absolutely look at how to revise the process for next year.
I'm sure that the intentions are good. They always are. I just think that sometimes, again, when we have so much coming at one time, and to me, this is important stuff. Everything is important, but this is important stuff. And I just want to make sure that if I'm going to vote on something, I'm understanding what I'm voting on.
Absolutely, and it lends itself to, quite honestly, as Mr. Fix pointed out, as I'm thinking through what's a way for us to find that happy median with this, it could be that after each department presentation, we still provide you with a comprehensive summary sheet that's abbreviated, saying this department was addressed, here's what we're doing, this department was addressed, here's what we're doing. And we just keep adding to it as we go through, and that way you have a 1 or 2 page document that just summarizes the totality of the changes, so you don't always feel like you have to go back multiple months. So, thank you for this, for helping me come up with that, but we'll definitely add something like that in the future.
I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Fields?
No, sir. No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, and then we'll have our superintendent's report.
Yes, ma'am.
And I apologize, Mr. Bridges, for the public hearing, we'll need to bring that as it's 5 different motions. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. You'll see there are 6 items listed. The total doesn't require that.
Okay,
You want the 3 millage items and the 2 resolutions.
perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then we'll have superintendent's report, and then back to Mr. Bridges, authority to advertise public hearing. And then we will have board members' reports and public comments. Any questions on any of the reports? All right, seeing none. Does anyone have any liaison reports or updates from their respected committees, events you've attended? Mr. Sharpless?
This isn't an event I attended, but it's one in the future. I just want to make everyone aware. Got an email through FSBA. October 14th, they opened up tours of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I plan on attending that on October 14th and having a hour-and-a-half tour of the building where the shootings took place. It's somber, but it's a reality. And so I wanted to let you all know that I will be going there on October 14th.
Thank you, Justin. And I believe that went to members of the board of directors. However, if you did not receive the email and are interested in attending, contact Angela, or not Angela, sorry, contact Andrea, and she can get you set up for that. That's open only for school board members. Okay, okay. There were a couple board members that did not, so somebody sent out a text clarifying.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Any other updates? Ms. Cunningham?
This isn't necessarily a liaison update, but I just thought it would be kind of nice. One of those amongst us up here on the dais has just become a grandfather. Wes's son and daughter-in-law just had a baby on Monday. Why don't you give us a quick update? I'm so happy for you.
We were up there for the weekend just to help them settle in their house. She wasn't due until the 27th. But we went to bed Sunday night thinking we'd get up Monday morning and drive home. And instead of 3 o'clock, there was quite a ruckus upstairs, and my daughter-in-law was in labor. So at 1 a.m. last night, they produced Ruby May, the first girl child in my family since my mother. And she was 5 pounds, 14 ounces, and mother and baby are beautiful.
Beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yay. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. Anyone else have anything to share? All right, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned, and we will be back at 5 p.m. for our board meeting.